Good morning, YouTube. My name's Will. This is Enzo. And today we are going to talk about Evos, which is what I like to do. If you've watched any of the previous videos, you can see some updates on my car, the 05 Evo 8 RS. And what this video is this is kind of a follow-up to one of my previous videos that I did talking about how to choose the right Evo. Now what we're going to talk about is, once you found it, how you're going to buy it, because it's not going to be easy for most people. I wanted to get this video done this morning before it gets too hot. It's supposed to be like, I don't know, mid-80s today. Right now we're still in the shadows, and we've got a lot to do today. And by we, I mean Enzo and I, because hopefully he'll help me. The wife's gift did show up. It's 300 pounds and on a pallet. Was not expecting that, so I don't know where I'm supposed to hide this for the next 24 hours, but we'll figure it out. Probably at the neighbor's, but I'm thinking I'm going to have to take some of it out. Unless you're going to pull this sled dog style. No, I didn't think so. All right, so my Evo I've owned for 3 years, I think, at this point. No, it's longer than that. Yeah, 3-4 years. I don't know. Anyways, and it is financed. It's financed through my credit union. I did, I think, 60 months, maybe 63. I don't really remember. I tried to look it up, and their website is less than ideal. What matters is the fact that it is financed. And obviously, I didn't buy this new. You know, I didn't finance a car for 13 years. I think the longest you can finance a car nowadays is 8 years, maybe. Maybe, unless there's some sort of weird stuff out there. I know you can do boats and stuff longer, but anyways. So I want to talk about how I finance. Now, this isn't some, mystery, crazy one-off things. I do this all the time with cars. Got some notes here that are kind of floating around. The FJ is financed. Obviously, the Focus is financed, but that was bought brand new. The Evo 10 was financed. The Lexus ISF was financed. I mean, every car. Even when I bought a 99 Civic, it was financed. So that's not unusual for me. I'm a firm believer in not spending cash. I know there's this whole generational thing. The older generations tend to like to be in debt. It's looked upon as kind of like a bad thing and so forth. However, if you look at the math and the numbers, debt is usually the smarter way to go with things. Keep it in mind that there's a difference between just debt for the sake of debt, going to Best Buy and, shopping and, putting a bunch of clothes and TVs and whatnot on credit. That's unsecured debt. That's a little bit different. However, debt that is secured by an asset is almost always better than having that asset paid, because otherwise it's just cash sitting doing nothing, and in most cases depreciating. So had I paid cash for the Evo, well, that's a poor example because the Evo's actually gone up in value, but the Focus would be a better example. Paying cash for the Focus, it's going to go down in value. It's essentially my cash going down in value, whereas if you finance it and then you take your cash and invest it, you can actually sometimes earn more than what that interest rate would have been. And that's going to vary on a few things. What your interest rate is, how the market's doing, length of time, what your credit score is, a whole bunch of things. So we won't get too deep into that. Let's just talk about the basics of, you want to buy a car like this, and you don't have I looked it up, this NADA's for about, I think, 14 grand now. Let's see. Yeah, 14. A little over 14 for this now. Obviously, it doesn't run, so I wouldn't get 14. But anyways, if you were looking to buy something like this, I did look up, like an Evo 9 value, and they seem to be going at the high end around 19K is the high book value. Not necessarily the highest, but it's definitely one of the higher ones. That's a lot of cash for really anybody to put out typically, let alone most of the people that are going to be interested in these cars. The thing that always drove me nuts was relatively speaking, I had zero issues going into a car dealership or a bank and getting them to finance me on a brand new car that we all know is going to depreciate. Um, you know, but if I wanted to buy like this Evo that is not going to depreciate, it was suddenly like I was just trying to do craziness. I get the bank's point of view in the sense that if people finance older cars and older cars are more inclined to break, case in point, they may be more inclined to just let the loan go, just let it default. Who wants to make a car payment on a car that doesn't run other than, crazy people like myself? This is obviously a more extreme example because I've financed all my cars. There's only one like this. And as I've said in other videos, if I really want to, I can fix this car. But I do have a reason for waiting, which isn't important right now. So, I'm going to catch the bird? Doubtful. Cat caught the bird one time. Anyways, how you can buy a car like this. So we're going to talk about how you can do it. Talk about why in most cases it's a better idea. Okay, let's get down to the actual numbers here. I did look it up here, and I had to kind of chop this up a little bit, obviously, to cover up some of my information. But as you can see right here, my interest rate is 3.7%. They do these quarterly, so I think I owe like 45 now or something. I don't know. There's not a way for me to really prove that's the loan on this car without really divulging like sensitive information, which I'm not going to do. So you're just going to have to take my word on it. But anyways, that car is financed at 3.7%. Now, I will say that the credit union that I financed through, you can't get that rate on a car this old right now. The Fed has for the last, I don't know if it's been consecutive quarters, but definitely several quarters over the last year and a half, they have been slowly raising the interest rate. So the lowest you can get right now is 5.74. Still not a terrible thing, and I will still gladly finance at that. You have to keep in mind that that's still better to finance than it is to pay cash, and we'll talk about that more in just a moment. So let's talk about how you can finance a car like I did. Now, as I just said, I did this through my credit union, and that's going to be the key. Credit unions are going to be your best friend. Most banks are not going to loan on cars this old. If you go through a dealership, that might be a little bit different. I know that the one exception of the cars we financed that we didn't go through our credit union was the Lexus, and we could have. However, we got a little bit better rate and went with, drawing a blank now. Oh my God. Wells Fargo. And I will never go with them again. I will gladly pay extra to never go with them again. But anyways, so did just a brief bit of research to get the current terms, and right now the best you can get is 5.74. It's not as good as the 3.7 I got, but that's just the fact of the matter. The Fed has been slowly raising the rates. Can't really do much about that. I did pull up Bank of America's website. I didn't go through any other websites. I don't really care. I just wanted to kind of pull up a comparison because most banks are like this. And that is, they have some pretty strict rules in that if the car is over 10 years, they won't finance it. So right then and there, you're out of luck. I bought this from a private party. It was over 10 years old. They're not going to finance it. Again, if you're going through a dealership, they might. That's totally different. That's not what we're talking about. They also wouldn't finance over 125,000 miles. Doesn't apply to this car, doesn't apply to the FJ. However, it would have applied to my Civic that I financed. And they also won't finance it unless it's over $6,000. Again, wouldn't have been able to finance the Civic because I think I only financed like 5 on that. And they also won't do bikes. Doesn't really have a lot to do with this conversation. However, I did finance my R1 through my credit union. Obviously, Bank of America wouldn't have done that. What's going on, buddy? You tired? He's tired. We've already been to the park and everything, so he's pretty much ready to lay down. Doesn't bode well for you because we still got a lot of work to do. Yeah. So, Banks are most likely not going to be your friend, especially if you're going private party, which on a car like an Evo, you most likely are. I mean, you know, if you're watching these videos, how infrequently you're just going to roll up onto a lot and find an Evo 8 or an Evo 9, one that hasn't been, passed through auctions, and who knows what's wrong with it. Every once in a while when I see one of these on a lot near my house, in my area, I try to make a point to go swing by it or at least look at the pictures kind of in detail. And it's always just so sketchy. So, not saying you can't, I'm not saying the dealerships are necessarily sketchy. I'm just saying the cars that get traded in like that get put into auction, they're typically either repos, at which point the person didn't care, or they are people trading in that just wanted to wipe their hands with a problem that they knew they had and didn't want to sell it to another person. So I definitely would be cautious of that. Moving on. Credit unions are going to be your best friend. Now, a lot of credit unions have rules about who can apply. So you are going to have to look into that a little bit. I know, I go through GE Credit Union, which is obviously for GE employees. Now, I'm not a GE employee, but if you read in their, bylaws or rules, I don't know. If you actually live in certain counties in Ohio that GE has their plants, you can join the credit union. So that's how I was able to join, no problem. There are other credit unions. I was actually in another one before the GE one, and not all are created equal. I think it's going to have to do with the size and maybe the area. Buddy, notes hit him. But like a car like this, they would have financed it, but they would have only done 24 months. Well, 24 months on this would have been like a $600 payment. That doesn't really help me. So, look around, look at their website. Like GE's terms are all on their website. You can look at that. Credit scores are going to be important. That's going to matter how much they finance. If your credit's less than perfect, they may still finance you. They just may not finance at all. I know that they typically have tiers. Like if your credit score is above this, they'll do 80%. If it's above this, they'll do 100. And if it's like tier 1, they'll do 120%. So to give you some numbers, this car is currently valued. GE, again, they go off NADA. So it's currently valued at like 14.2 according to NADA, which means, cheat sheet here, I could borrow $17,000. That's also important to know because I could essentially refinance this car for $17,000. So if if interest rates went lower, or I wanted to find a good way to borrow cash, this car's not going anywhere anytime soon. So, when it's paid off, or even now, if I wanted to, I only owe like $4 something on it, I could essentially get an influx of cash if I wanted to do that. And I may do that for some other stuff, but talk about that later. If you look at like an Evo 9 MR, they value them, depending on the mileage, that's going to vary, but I pulled up one, kind of got an estimate. It looks like about $19,000, which would mean you could finance $23,000. Now, that's good. You could finance your tax on that. It also gives you a little bit of room. And they'll do it up to 63 months. So, a payment on that, I don't know if on that, you're probably looking closer to $450. But depending on the Evo, the year, and the price, your payment's going to be anywhere from $300 to, $500 probably. So, that's right in there with, actually, that's honestly pretty low for car payments. Most new cars are going to be that much. Even if you went out and bought a brand new Civic Si for, I think they're around $25,000, and I don't think Honda's doing 0%, but let's say they were, your payment's still gonna be like $500, because usually they'll only do 0% for 60 months. And I know a lot of people get hung up, especially if you really sit and do the math, and you think, but I'm paying this much in interest and all this stuff. The fact of the matter is, if you do the math, one, it's not really that much. I typically pay about $200 to $300 a year interest on this car. And if you consider that I got to keep all my cash, that's not too bad. But more importantly than that, and this is, I think, where the generational gaps kind of change, is that they say, pay everything off, pay cash for everything, don't have debt. And let's say I could have gone out and bought this with cash. I think I paid like 13 or something for this. So let's say I had 13,000 in cash just lying around doing nothing in my bank, which would be stupid. But let's say I did. Okay, so I can take 13,000, I can go put it in this car. Now, the good thing is this car hasn't gone down in value. So let's say I didn't even really drive it. Let's say it was still running. Okay, so now it's worth 14 something. Okay, good. My investment's gone up at that point. Side note, cars are not investments. Don't look at them that way. Unless you're some multimillionaire buying one-of-a-kind Ferraris or something, cars are not investments. So just knock that off right now. Hi, buddy. Yeah, they're not investments. But let's look at it this way. Instead, I take that money, that 13,000, whatever, and I put it in the market. Historically, the market's done 6 to 7%. So I can either save 3.7% interest or I can earn 6 to 7%. Well, duh. Obviously you take the cash and you invest, and that's the key difference. And I think that's where some of the confusion comes in. You've got this older generation that says, you shouldn't be going into debt for things, which I agree with to an extent. Like I said before, cars, clothes, TVs, or not cars. Anyways, unsecured debt. That's a bad idea. However, I've got this asset here, so if I need to sell it, I can always do that. That cash I can pull it out of the market if I want to. Now, I'm not your financial advisor, and don't look at this as that. With that said, you generally don't want to pull stuff out of the market, especially if the market's down, which it is a little bit right now. It's, we've gone through a little bit of a correction. So depending on what you're invested in anyways, certain investments have gotten hit harder than others. Moving on. So that's why I did not and will not pay cash for a car. In fact, I don't like putting down payments on cars. I don't even like paying the taxes on cars, which is why I don't. Everything when I buy cars is I want to walk in, buy a car, and zero out of pocket. Maybe a license and title fee if I go to the DMV separately, but usually even that, why? Why take money out of my account when I can easily borrow? And that's the trick. If I had poor credit and I could only get 15% interest, well, yeah, now you're starting to be a little bit different. However, I still would finance. And the reason being that if I have poor credit, the only way I'm going to get better credit is to buy things on credit, like a car. So it doesn't really do me any good to pay cash and not pay that interest, because it's not going to help my credit, which in the long run is just going to cost me more money. So I will finance at the 12, 15%, whatever it was. In fact, my first Evo 9 that I bought brand new, mind you, was like 12 something percent interest. I had no cosigner. It was just me. I was 20 years old. So the fact that I even got financed was pretty impressive. But it was like 12 something percent interest, and I paid it. Paid it for a year. Paid all my payments on time. Actually paid a little extra. Paid them all on time. And then I immediately went and got it refinanced at another bank and got like whatever the lowest percent at the time was. I think it was like maybe 2%, maybe, and maybe 3%, I don't know. And refinanced. So I paid that high interest for a year, but my credit just skyrocketed after that point. Prior to buying that car, I had trouble getting approved for credit. After that, it was easy. And that's the main key. Neighbors probably wondering, what is he doing? So even if you have poor credit, I would still finance. So there's really never a reason to pay cash. I struggle to think of an excuse to pay cash. The only thing I can really come up with is like when I bought my bike, the R1, I paid cash simply because it was easier to go there, buy it from the seller, pay cash. I also did this with the Mazda 3, the Speed 3 that we had. Just because it made life easier, I went and paid cash, but then I immediately took that title into my bank and signed it over to them and got a loan on it. So, it just made my life easier in those situations to buy the vehicles in cash. That way I could just get them and go. So that would be about the only excuse. As a final thing, the the thing that always annoyed me was, a bank they have no issues loaning on new cars. I didn't pay sticker for the Focus, but had I paid sticker, I would have financed like 29 plus taxes. I mean, it would have been over $30,000. And I looked it up. That car is worth 21.6 right now. So within a year, you've dropped 9,000. Where you finance something like this, and within a year, the value virtually unchanged, maybe even goes up a little. As I said before, I get why banks don't do that. I think from their point of view, they're bigger. They kind of got to just keep a standard. They got to look at the risk as far as not so much the asset, but the person paying it. And from their point of view, people are much more likely to pay on a car that runs, that's still new, that's getting them to work, versus a car that sits in a garage and gets pulled out by hand once every few weeks to get washed. A lot of people might just default on that and wipe their hands. So I get that, but it still frustrates me, and it's why I don't like to deal with banks. That's why I prefer to deal with the credit union. I still use bank for checking and debit card and stuff, although I virtually never swipe a debit card for security reasons, which we don't have to get into right now. So that's going to do it for this video on how to finance an Evo, or really any older car. If you have any questions, if you're looking at cars, want to throw it my way, have me look at it or anything, I'm more than happy to do that. If you got any questions about Evos, about Enzo, about myself, I'm more than happy to answer anything like that. And one last thing, there's something else. What else was I going to say, buddy? Do you remember? Oh yeah. One last thing, I did just briefly get on like Auto Trader or something and pull up some Evos just to see where they were falling as far as the sale price and what they're actually worth according to book value. You can't always go by book value. You kind of got to look at what the market's doing. In book value, while it follows the market, it's usually behind and delayed. So things can change. However, that's where your negotiating skills are going to come in, and a lot of times people are going to be higher. I saw a few Evos on there right away where it's like, these are they're too expensive and they're not going to sell at this price because nobody with enough cash to spend is going to be stupid enough to buy that, and no bank's going to finance that. Even with a credit union, I'd still have to put out probably $5 or $6 grand of my own money, and unless it's got like some proof of receipts, full motor build or something, I'm just not going to do that. So if you are looking at these cars and you're looking at the values and you're looking at what people are asking and they're not lining up, it's probably because they're asking too much. In those situations, it really comes down to negotiating. Don't be a jerk about it. Don't be one of these people, hey, your price is just stupid, you're never going to sell it, because I got news for you. You let them know that, they're never going to sell it to you. So if you actually want to buy a car, come at it a different way. And honestly, just sometimes you just got to wait. I bought this car from a guy who was living in the U.S. but was going to be moving overseas for a couple years, and he was moving in about a month, so he was motivated to sell, so he priced it accordingly. He priced it in the market that he knew that it would sell. It was actually the cheapest listed Evo in America at the time on Auto Trader, except for maybe one that had like a blown motor listed on there. So I'm not saying you're going to get them that cheap. I'm not saying you're going to get lucky like that. Although I wouldn't necessarily call it luck either, because I used to stalk Auto Trader with Evos for months and months and months. So really, you just got to be patient. Again, if you have any questions about any specific cars you find, or financing or anything like that, once again, disclaimer, not your financial advisor, but I'd be happy to help you out in any way I can with some just general information. With that being said, I'm going to end this now. It's already gone longer than I anticipated. But I appreciate you guys watching. Like if that's your thing. If you've got any specific questions, once again, feel free to ask. Other than that, you guys have a great day, and I will see you guys next time. Buddy, you want to say bye? Say bye? Say bye-bye.
How'd you get so far away?